Well, welcome back to another episode of the Always About People show. My name is Chris Allen, and I'm the host of this incredible video cast. And we're glad to have you back. Whether you're watching us live on YouTube, on Facebook, on, on LinkedIn, we're just glad that you're joining with us. And I want to remind you, this is a show where we want you to engage. We would ask that you would take a moment to send in any questions, comment on things. We'd love to be able to get to any thoughts that you have around this topic today. We wanted to cover an important topic that I'm hearing a lot in the workplace today. Obviously, post-pandemic, there are a number of leaders and organizations who are asking the question, what is this going to look like in the future? In addition to just the post-pandemic, we have a next generation that's entering the workforce. Obviously, we've talked for many years about these millennials. By the way, those of you who are Can you hear me? All right. Well, I guess we're still live. Hey, so we're just experiencing some technical difficulties, as you might be aware, but we're going to continue this show, and I'm coming to you from a different camera today. So back to what we were talking about in this post-pandemic sort of workplace environment, we're also dealing with the fact that this next generation's entering the workplace. We talked about millennials just briefly before my camera cut out on me and our internet was lost. But the oldest millennials are now 42 years old. And so then we've got the next generation we've got Gen Z, which are entering the workforce, but now people are already talking about the next generation, the Alpha generation. I know you're probably laughing. The last thing we need to call this generation is Alpha, the first. But that is what we're referring to them as. And so today we thought we would take a few moments to discuss this idea of creating cultural clarity through science. Because many of you may be aware that there are surveys out there, there are other ways of calculating culture and all of that. But we wanted to cover this idea of how to really use science to cover these important ideas and concepts. So I've invited a good friend. He's a colleague. This is our Chief Information Officer at Always About People. Would you help me welcome my good friend, Yuri?
Hi, Chris.
Yuri, sorry about the technical glitch.
No problem.
Thanks for sharing with us.
Well, at least people know that we're live.
We are live, and we're doing the best that we can. So as I mentioned, like we've got a little bit of a different camera view here today, but to our guests, thanks for bearing with us today. But Yuri, we wanted to cover this topic of creating cultural clarity through science. Obviously, I know that you have a passion for science. You have a passion for math. You're a data scientist in many ways. I'd love for you to just take a few moments to share with people a little bit about your background, because I think that's important to the conversation.
Well, I do not have any master's degrees or PhDs. I was just too lazy to do that, but I do have a degree in advanced econometrics and international economics. And as you always say, that numbers make me geek out, and yeah, they do. I truly believe numbers mathematics is the universal language, or the language of God. I do believe that through mathematics and through numbers, we can solve things, and we can find out what problems are, and also find what solutions we can use. So that's where I come in when it comes to what you do. And I back you up with numbers. But I guess here's where you're supposed to say what you do before I say what I do.
Well, I guess what I just wanted to share with our guests is that, there are so many survey options that people can choose from today. I mean, when people are measuring culture, or they're measuring engagement, or they're measuring employee satisfaction, there are so many options that people can pick from, pay for, even free options that are available on the internet. But I think what we wanted to do today, Yuri, was talk about how to really align the survey that you choose, the way that you're measuring, with true statistical outcomes. And I think one of the things that I'll just share about what we do is we help to create cultures where people thrive. And while we're doing that inside of organizations, we don't just want to come in and think that we're doing something great. We would love to be able to actually measure it. We want to be able to determine that we're doing what we say we're going to do. And so that was a conversation that we've had amongst our team to say, how can we become better at measuring the work that we're doing and helping people understand, hey, we're making progress. So we set out to create a survey. And Yuri, that's where you came in, because you looked over this survey. You ran it through all those crazy statistical models that you always talk about. And I thought it would be important that we just take a few moments to talk about surveys in general, because there are so many options that people have to choose from. But Yuri, you've helped me understand not all surveys are the same.
Exactly. Not all surveys are the same. And we need to do a historical incursion here into surveys and assessments. Up until about 30 years ago, I'd say, assessments were strictly psychological in workplaces. Nobody actually thought that statistics is a science until they realized, until managers and leaders realized that, hold on a second, putting a number to something can help you realize what problems there are, how to solve them, and especially that was valid in larger companies. It's easy when you have 10 employees. You can just do one-on-ones and understand what problems you have in the companies. What if you have 50? Or what if you have 500? What if you have 1,000 and in maybe 20 states? How do you do that? So that's where statisticians, together with sociologists, came in and proposed using what was already known, like Likert scales, that are, again, I have to disclaim, they are imperfect. We, as mathematicians, try to perfect them so that they work, and started creating all kinds of surveys and assessments. And maybe if you are in the workplace, you've already taken at least a pulse survey. How are those made, and how can you know that they are, there's some confidence level in those? Well, I wouldn't say easy, but to me it does sound easy. So basically what happens, you need to test it. You need to test that survey towards several models, like the Nash model. And now I'll now go technical and sound all smart and everything, but that's what we statisticians do. What happens is you need to prove that the results that you're getting are truthful, because not everyone takes that survey seriously. Not everyone responds the same way every day, because maybe they had a problem the day prior or in the morning in the traffic jam, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, some people simply do not take it seriously. And there is this problem that's called survey fatigue. When you overdo it in companies with surveys, people simply don't take them seriously at some point. Likert scales, for those that don't know, are strongly agree to strongly disagree, or vice versa, using a 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 scale. However, within our team, we decided to use a 6-point scale. We did not call it a Likert, because Likert by definition is either 5, 7, or 11. Simply put, we do not want a number in the middle.
Well, Yuri, that just reminds me, I mean, one of the things that I laugh about is when you have a 5-point or a 7-point scale, it's really easy to just, when you're unsure of how to answer, you just pick the middle.
Yep.
And as we were going through this, we kept discussing the fact that we want to force people to have to lean a certain way. And so that was when I said, to you, is it okay that we kind of change the structure of this scale?
And it was actually genius. Initially, I was thinking that while testing now we need to tell our viewers what we're talking about. We're talking about a survey that we call Clarity 15. And for those interested, you can go to clarity15.com and know more about it. It's a 15-question survey that basically quantifies, I would say, culture clarity within an organization, divided into 3 segments or categories, if you wish. And that was tested towards biases, several of them. It was tested towards truthfulness, and it also has test questions within, so that we know if people are truthful or not. Mm-hmm. Now back to what you were saying, Clarity 15 or any such assessment, when applied within a company, will lead to a number of results that to an untrained eye don't mean much. They're just numbers. So you can either empirically start looking for things, or you run models, and you need to verify. First of all, okay, so I'm trying not to go very technical here and explain in simple terms. So you need to find correlations. You need to find patterns within the company. That's where you find problematics, and that's where you find results. Patterns is what we are looking for, historically or not. And it's good to have historical data and be able to create indices. So like the Clarity 15 index, we have it already because we have a number of historical data that we can benchmark our results toward. So the results we get from a company, we can easily compare those to the results that we've previously got from other companies in those industries. That's how we are able to predict problems, because we already know the patterns. And I'll give an example. In the logistics business, we know exactly where problems are already, because we have a big chunk of data from from logistics, and we know what problematics are there. And most probably, if we apply it in another company within the same industry, we will find the same. So,
okay, let's back up, Yuri, for just a second. My gut tells me you've got some people who are listening or who will watch this who they've taken a survey before, and they've done their best to fill it out. They've left their responses. They've taken the time to fill it in, and then what happened is that they never heard from the company. The company never did anything with their results. That's one person. The other person that may be listening is a leader or an executive within an organization where they've either been a part of giving the assessment, or they have seen the results from a company, and they're looking at all these scores. And at least a couple of the people that I'm thinking about right now have looked at these scores and started to feel really poorly about their organization. Like, oh my goodness, we've got issues here, because they're looking at individual ratings to questions or whatever else. So on one hand, people take a survey, they feel really great about it, but then they never see their organization do anything. On the other hand, you could have a leader or an executive who's looking at the data and doesn't really know what to believe. And so I think the hard part is, how do we help people? How do we help organizations and individuals take assessments that actually do something, that tell us something, and then how do we make sure that we do something with the data?
Well, first thing first, assessments need to be, unless they are standard like our Clarity 15, they need to be created around the company, around the culture of the company, around the size of the company, around the problematics that they know about. So it needs to be built. It shouldn't be just picked from the shelf and applied in the company. It just won't work. That's number one. Second is, it depends on the report. What do they see in the report? Do they see just means? Means are wrong. By default, taking a Likert scale is an ordinal scale. It's not an interval scale. So therefore, you cannot really take means unless they're weighted. And what do they tell you? What does it mean? So 4.8 out of 6, what does that mean? Is it a lot? Is it not? That's where benchmarks come in. You need something to compare it to. You need to know whether that's good or not. And then when reading that report, depends on how poor or how well it was made, leaders need to understand the problematics. Well, we, at least in our reports, we always supply by disclaiming, we disclaim ourselves, and we always say that we do not know, we just interpret the numbers, but our numbers show that these are the problems that we found. And later on, leaders need to take those results and apply changes. And that's probably where you, Chris, come in, because you come with many solutions to the problems that we found in surveys. And at a certain period of time, be that 3 months, and I'd say 3 months, not more, because again, going back to survey fatigue, do not overdo it with surveys. You need to do the same exact survey within the same population that you did before. This way you understand where you stand, how well you do. I do not know what the politics of companies are, but I strongly believe that those results need to be shared with teams. People need to know how they scored, because that's also part of survey taking. People want to know the final result. It's the same with all kinds of tests that we take in our life. We want to know the result.
Yeah. So Yuri, one of the thoughts that I have is, we've we've done the Clarity 15, which is kind of a survey that looks at the clarity of the culture across the entire organization. We've also developed some employee pulse surveys, which are catered and specifically designed around the organization. And that allows us to really find out the information we're trying to find. Because if an organization or a CEO or a leadership team tells us, here's what I am trying to improve or develop, we can actually go in and design a survey around that, and then we can measure it. Well, you mentioned before that there were some thoughts around just taking the mean or the average of scores. And so my gut also tells me that for most leaders, if your score is above a 4.5 on a 6, you would start to think, well, that's really great. That's a good score. But based on even your nonverbal feedback right there, not necessarily,
No.
right?
No.
Because you have to look at that score in correlation to the other questions of the assessment.
Exactly.
And begin to think through, okay, which questions are scoring low, and do those questions correlate to other low scores? And so there's a lot more science in this than just looking at the average scores of 15, 20 questions, correct?
Well, the historic incursion that I started was because all of our assessments that we have today come from psychological. And in psychology, we have this principle of, do not see the glass half empty, see it half full. Not in statistics. I'd love to see it half empty. And there's actually a Babel model of approaching it through negative results. So what I look for is the lowest scores, the lowest respondent score, and start analyzing and seeing patterns in there. I'm interested why that person answered that badly. And then we start correlating those worst answers and worst scores for questions to the other questions within. And we, in several cases, found that there are whole teams within that workplace who actually are not that satisfied with the overall company or workplace. And that's where leaders can take action.
Yeah.
They will need to discover that. And yes, you're right. You need to go question by question, not as a overall mean.
Yeah. So Yuri, I was talking with an executive about a month ago who had gotten some survey results back from their large organization. And overall, the survey results were okay, but there were some sort of open-ended questions where people wrote in their responses, and there were some really negative comments and thoughts. But because the survey was anonymous, they didn't know who these comments were coming from. They didn't know how many people it represented. They just had a collection of comments. And I think one of the things that we would say, and that you've taught me, is you have to look at the correlations between these questions to know, is it the same person who's answering negatively on all of these questions? And if so, then you've got just a person who's upset with the organization. However, if there are multiple people who are answering low across different questions, now we've got a different issue. But without correlating, without looking at all of that, you would have no idea.
No. And that's why I love psychometric tests. I am totally against open questions because they don't tell me anything. I cannot quantify, I cannot put a number to it. I cannot create a statistical model out of it. It doesn't tell me anything. Yes, it's like getting texts, and reviews on Google. That's pretty much what it is. Yeah. However, if you have psychometric questions and an open question, and you see that thing is very negative, then look at what that person answered in the other questions. And you might realize that maybe he's not completely dissatisfied. Maybe there are things that he likes in the company. But if that looks like a pattern, you do correlations. And again, I get back to this: look for patterns. You need to look for patterns within your results, and you will start seeing that some of the people have a more or less similar graph, even though some is higher, some is lower, but it looks similar. That basically tells you that there is a problem within that part, within that team, within that wing of your company.
Well, Yuri, one of the things that we see in this next generation and we see in this post-pandemic workplace environment is that really what people want in their work is a sense of autonomy, a sense that give me the freedom and flexibility to make my own decisions, to accomplish what I'm supposed to accomplish in my own way and with some level of flexibility. However, oftentimes what we're seeing in organizations is that with newer managers moving from individual contributor into leadership roles, most new leaders tend to micromanage because the micromanagement is sort of a way of controlling the situation. And so we move from this need for autonomy to the reality of micromanagement. And when it comes to surveys, what we're trying to uncover is how do we prove to people, to organizations, that this is something that's going on? And I guess what I would love for you to just touch on is, this whole micromanagement issue it's a big deal. Even in a remote work environment, there are ways of micromanaging by making sure that people are logged on at a certain time, kind of over meeting together. But I'd love to just talk for a few moments about micromanagement, how we can begin to measure that, but then how do we do something about it?
Well, I cannot use words like micromanaging is wrong, but it is, because that's lack of trust. That there's a reason why you have a team and why you delegate certain tasks to certain people, because you need to trust them with their skills. And this is where the problem comes, because where there's no trust, you cannot really talk about company culture, because there's a manager trying to do everything for his team, everything. Mm-hmm. That's micromanagement. Now, many of our viewers are familiar with Professor John Nash because of the movie The Beautiful Mind. John Nash, actually a professor that I geek about because I like his work regarding human dynamics and game theory and his Nash equilibrium. All of this was applied until rather recently within company relations, industrial relations between companies. So competitors, negotiations, etc., etc. But today, the Nash equilibrium can easily be applied within companies. So you have this phrase that you constantly use, Chris, and I'd love you to say it. People do not wake up in the morning and think, what should I screw up at work today? No, they don't. Well, unless they're saboteurs. Mm-hmm. They might be, maybe they hate everything and they just want to destroy the company, but that's not the case. That's statistically close to zero. So when you know that, when you realize that people do not wake up with this idea, you need to understand that people come to work, stay at home and work from home. They need to follow the strategy that was decided either by the team or by the company as a whole. And each of them does R&D, marketing does marketing, and so on and so forth. And then an example here is the actual definition of the Nash equilibrium. And I'll read it. Mm-hmm. Neither player can increase his expected payoff by unilaterally changing his strategy. So if a person within a team decides that he needs to do it somewhat differently with the different strategy, most probably will take the team off the right path. And a simple example is, in the United States, you drive on the right. In Britain, they drive on the left. Well, when you go to Britain and you want to drive from point A to point B, just like the rest of the drivers, it's not like you're going to drive on the right. you're going to drive on the left, even though you don't like the strategy. You won't change the strategy because you will either die or kill someone, and you will get stopped by police, for sure. Same with Brits who come to the States. They do not drive on the left. They drive on the right. So that's where the Nash equilibrium comes in. The whole team, so all of the players have the same path, or let's say, yes, same path, same strategy towards a common goal, but each of them has their role. And you as a manager need to understand that that's if you want to achieve Nash equilibrium, you need to stop micromanaging people.
This is really important because obviously the topic today was creating cultural clarity through science. We know that in using science, some simple surveys, statistical analysis, correlations, and a few models, we can look at the survey responses from individuals in a company, and we can pretty quickly determine who is in alignment with the corporation, where does the executive team need to make some improvements, who is micromanaging, how do people feel about that. But we can design these surveys with some of these thoughts in mind. And so as people and as executive teams and as leaders try to figure out, how do I create a workplace environment that attracts and retains this next generation in this post-pandemic workplace where people want freedom and flexibility, some people want remote, some people want hybrid. How do we gather the necessary data to be able to create workplaces where people thrive? And Yuri, you're helping put the science behind some of these surveys for the work that we do at Always About People. But we want to let guests know that even as you look at producing different surveys or assessments within your organization, we hope that we've equipped you with a few extra questions to ask. And if you just want our thoughts or our advice, feel free to reach out directly to us. Yuri, any final thoughts on science and how we help people create surveys that matter?
Well, the thought is simple. You should not ignore mathematics when it comes to managing your company or being a leader as well. Leadership is not just about charisma. It's not just about talking. It's about knowing the numbers within your company. If you are good enough to be able to talk to a large company of 1,000 and know each and everyone's thoughts, then you don't need surveys. But for the rest of the non-superheroes, you do need surveys.
That's great. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to our guests for joining us today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing to follow us live on whichever platform you watch, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Thank you to those of you who left comments and asked questions. We will get back to those of you who leave comments or questions after the fact. Thanks for joining with us live. Again, we come to you each week with some relevant content around how the workplace is affecting people. Our company behind this is Always About People, where we help to create cultures where people thrive. That's the goal. And so each of the conversations that we have each week is around ideas, thoughts, philosophies, and maybe some challenges related to creating workplaces where people can thrive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.